The year was 1942, and Third Reich Industries, TRI, was in a sticky situation. The much-hyped Operation Barbarossa, an aggressive, debt-fueled merger attempt with rival Soviet holdings, had stalled miserably in the snowy suburbs of the competitor's main office block. CEO Adolf Hitler, a man whose strategic creativity was matched only by his profound lack of understanding regarding basic supply chain management, was furious. The core issue, as always, was resources. TRI's entire operation was currently guzzling refined petroleum faster than a German Panzer IV could burn through an annual budget. Even the junior partner, Romanian Petro Assets, was pouring its meager 100,000 tons of crude barrels into TRI's collective tank. And still, the fuel light was flashing angrily. Hitler, squinting intensely at a map which he often mistook for a visionary abstract painting, declared the solution. Project Blueprint, PBP. The objective was clear. Seize the rich resource acquisition targets, RATS, the oil fields of Caucasus in the southern Soviet sector. The Wehrmacht High Command, WHC, TRI's overworked and perpetually frustrated supply chain team crafted a sensible plan. It involved a methodical sweep toward the Caucasus Mountains, securing the flanks along the Don and Volga rivers first. Too simple, too conventional, boomed Hitler from his desk, which was cluttered with motivational posters featuring oversized eagles. We must also acquire the Stalingrad logistical hub, Stalingrad. The name alone seemed to make Hitler vibrate with a personal vendetta. It was a transport center, a major manufacturing site. And, worst of all, it was named for his communist frenemy, CEO Joseph Stalin, a clear violation of corporate branding etiquette. The WHC supply experts nearly wept into their clipboards. Sir, with all due respect, our internal modeling shows that diverting assets to an auxiliary target, primarily for purposes of spite, will critically overextend our intranet connectivity and logistical chains, known as the Rückwärtige Dienst. Hitler waved his hand dismissively. Nonsense. We will simply split Army Group South into two highly motivated, yet grossly under-resourced teams. Group A handles the oil fields. Group B, led by our 6th branch, will secure the Volga Office Park. And thus, on June 28, 1942, the expansion commenced. Branch manager Friedrich Paulus, a man whose meticulously pressed uniform was the only thing standing between him and a full-blown nervous breakdown, oversaw the 6th Army branch. They were meant to be securing vital infrastructure. Instead, they found themselves racing across endless sun-baked plains, driving the corporate tanks and trucks, until their internal combustion engines begged for mercy. The initial progress was excellent. Soviet holdings had been caught completely off guard, finding this second wave of TRI expansionist activity just as disruptive and confusing as the first. By mid-July, Paulus's team was within striking distance of the Stalingrad office park, a move that was completely unauthorized by the original PBP draft. An immediate acquisition of the Stalingrad hub is mandatory. Read the hastily scribbled memo from corporate HQ. Dated July 23rd, Paulus stared at the memo with a dead-eyed gaze. His team, while highly trained, was fraying at the edges, Captain. Paulus addressed his staff officer. Logistics report, please. The captain grimaced. Sir, we are burning through fuel faster than we can requisition it. Internet connectivity is currently rated at sporadic to non-existent. And, perhaps most worryingly, our HR attrition rate has spiked. Attrition, due to enemy action? Paulus asked, rubbing his temples. primarily due to non-compliant organic transportation. Unit consumption, sir, the captain clarified, choosing highly sanitized corporate jargon for eating the horses. And also, the usual suspects, typhus and dysentery. The 6th branch is losing a quarter of its men to poor workplace hygiene protocols. Paulus sighed. He was supposed to be leading a high-speed corporate invasion, and instead, he was running a massive, underfunded public health crisis. Meanwhile, back at the Kremlin office tower, rival CEO Stalin wasn't just sitting idle. Having correctly predicted Hitler's predictable detour into spite-based management, Stalin Corp mobilized its internal defense structures. Tanks rolled off assembly lines like a tidal wave of metallic menace, and reinforcements were summoned. Then came the infamous internal directive. Mandatory Retention Policy 227. MRP 227. Stalin's message to his staff was brutal. Not a step back. MRP 227 was a direct counter-narrative to a dangerous idea, sweeping the dispirited Red Army teams. The concept of strategic retreat and outrunning the competition. The logic was that Soviet holdings was simply too vast. They could retreat indefinitely, letting TRI's supply chains collapse. In the vacuum, Stalin crushed that notion. He framed it as corporate abandonment. The local contract workforce civilians were cursing the Red Army for leaving them behind. They were now being conscripted to dig emergency infrastructure trenches and work mandatory shifts in the arms factories. This wasn't going to be a quick acquisition. This was going to be an office party where everyone brought their own chainsaws. On August 21st, after nearly a month of frantic internal preparations on both sides, TRI's forces, including junior partners from Italy, Romania, Hungary, and Croatia, crossed the Don River. The official opening salvo for the Stalingrad office park acquisition was delivered by Luftflotte 4, TRI's air freight department. Led by the perpetually overconfident and under-delivering air freight manager, Hermann Göring. It was less an air freight delivery and more an aggressive digital marketing campaign, executed via heavy ordnance. For several days, bombers leveled massive swaths of the city. The goal was to soften the target and demonstrate market dominance. The result was the obliteration of 40,000 to 75,000 local contractors, and the transformation of the logistical hub into a vast, unnavigable pile of rubble. Excellent work, declared the memos coming from HQ. The target is neutralized. Paulus, observing the smoking ruins, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Neutralized, sir. They haven't neutralized it. They've turned a simple office building into 1,000 interconnected, fortified rat holes. This is no longer an acquisition. It's a site clearance project that happens to be actively shooting back. The initial push was met with fanatical resistance. One German armored spearhead drove successfully to the Volga on the northern side, but was promptly cut off by the communists, resulting in a localized encirclement panic. Among the staff, Paulus, ever the corporate diplomat, had to manage the fallout. General Gustav Anton von Wietersheim, the commander of the newly isolated pocket, was sending increasingly frantic telexes demanding immediate extraction. 2 days later, the 4th Panzer Army, under General Hermann Hoth, launched an attack on the southern side, only to be turned back. The battle became a chaotic game of corporate football, with various teams pushing toward the river. The civilian population, previously digging trenches, now descended into full-blown panic. Hoth seized the resulting market volatility, driving northward 20 kilometers, forcing the Soviet sector commander, Yeryomenko, to pull his remaining teams back into better fortified positions. within the city limits. August ended with Paulus's 6th Branch team breaking through the northern encirclement, an intense internal rescue operation that took a week of brutal engagement. The German operational boundaries solidified, partially surrounding Stalin's office park. Meanwhile, in the shadows, Soviet strategic consultant Georgy Zhukov, a man whose reputation for turning strategic disaster into tactical mayhem was legendary, launched a probing attack. In the north, the attack failed to achieve a full encirclement, but succeeded in capturing Hitler's attention and tying down several of Paulus's sorely needed personnel. Seeing this as yet another opportunity to complicate matters, CEO. Hitler dismissed the commander of Army Group B and took personal operational oversight of the northern sector. The Führer himself will lead us in the slow, bloody, house-to-house attrition that is absolutely against the original objectives, whispered Paulus's staff officer, sounding dangerously close to sedition. Despite the micromanagement from HQ, the advance continued, inch by agonizing inch. On September 9th, the 29th Motor Division achieved a major milestone. They became the first TRI unit to reach the southern shores of the Volga, the main logistical artery of the city. The achievement, however, came with a devastating strategic cost. The Soviet defenders, the 62nd and 64th Armies, were now split, cut off from each other. But the 62nd, directly in the blast zone, was now wholly reliant on supply deliveries ferried across the Volga, under constant, intense German fire. The 62nd was woefully under strength, its only intact division being the NKVD riflemen. Stalin's internal security contractors, known for their unwavering dedication to the "not a step back" policy. The 62nd's new field manager, Vasily Chuikov, however, was a master of asymmetrical urban warfare. He issued a revolutionary tactical directive, Close Proximity Engagement, CPE. Hug the German lines, Chuikov commanded. The strategy was simple and brutal. Keep the frontline troops in constant contact with the Germans, preventing Luftflotte 4, the air freight department, from providing air support, lest they accidentally bomb their own team members. This led to intense, claustrophobic urban combat, fought room by room, cubicle by cubicle. On September 13th, the 6th Branch entered Stalingrad proper. The Luftwaffe opened a coordinated barrage with German heavy artillery. The Soviets responded with a counter-barrage of their own, guns and their terrifying Katyusha rockets, nicknamed Stalin's organs, which sounded exactly like a nightmare played on a pipe organ, accompanied by the screams of the recently deceased. TRI units pushed deep into the city center, capturing railway stations and driving hard for the Volga. In just one day, the 6th Branch and the supporting 4th Army achieved internal river access, placing the Germans firmly inside the logistical hub. But the sunshine and corporate optimism were short-lived. On September 16th, the Soviets recaptured key strategic hills overlooking the city center. General von Wietersheim, who had been rescued from the earlier pocket, dared to speak the unspeakable during a staff meeting, he posited. The TRI would ultimately fail to secure the city and suggested a strategic phased withdrawal. He was sacked instantly. Apparently, corporate loyalty was deemed more valuable than basic reality. Further complicating the clean sweep was the rise of heroic or maddeningly stubborn legacy data storage units. A group of 50 Soviet technicians fortified a massive grain elevator, holding off German assaults for 4 days until they were finally cleared on the 21st. Shortly thereafter, a handful of Soviet internal security contractors seized and fortified an apartment block that became famous as Pavlov's house, a stronghold that would resist TRI's efforts for a staggering 60 days. operating as a siege within a siege. By the end of September, the German forces held roughly 2/3 of the city, but were preparing for the final, most brutal push into the industrial heartland. As the Soviet reinforcements continued to slip across the Volga, bringing fresh, if inexperienced, meat to the grinder, Paulus launched his assault on the industrial sector. The reinforced Soviets pushed the Germans back, and on October 4th, Paulus received a devastating internal audit. The 51st Corps, long the tip of the Germanic spear, had taken such extensive HR losses that it had been officially downgraded to zero offensive capability. The entire 6th Branch was forced to halt offensive operations for a full 10 days, desperately attempting to restock, resupply, and recruit warm bodies. When the assault resumed, it was a hard, slow slog. The earlier aggressive digital marketing Luftwaffe bombing now bore bitter fruit. The rubble-strewn city was less a hub and more a labyrinth. The Soviet defenders had fortified or hidden themselves within the hollowed-out carcasses of buildings, turning the cityscape into a continuous, insidious line of traps and defenses. TRI forces were forced to fight methodically, nose to nose, minimizing the advantage of their superior firepower. The advance through the industrial zone dragged into November. By the 11th, the Soviets were reduced to isolated pockets of resistance in factories, in basements, in shattered houses. The Germans threw assault after assault at these pockets, succeeding only after suffering catastrophic losses. Paulus's men were low on everything: manpower, material, and willpower. A week later, the Russians held only a narrow, freezing stretch of the Volga shoreline, no more than 10% of the city. The objective was tantalizingly close, but TRI was too battered to press the advantage. Paulus could count over 60,000 corporate casualties in the 6th Branch alone. The operational objective had been technically achieved. They were holding the city. Now, they were simply clinging to the corpse of the city, licking their wounds, and settling into the miserable rhythm of a sub-zero stalemate. Neither side was prepared for the earth-shattering events about to unfold. General Winter, TRI's oldest corporate enemy, was covering the city in a raging blizzard, providing the perfect cover for rival CEO Stalin's secret weapon. For almost the entire month of September, in utmost secrecy, Zhukov and the Stavka, the Soviet High Command, strategic consultants had been formulating Project Crimson Tide, a massive, hostile counter-takeover plan. They called it Operation Uranus. At 3 a.m. on November 19th, Operation Uranus began. 10 Soviet armies, 1 million men, nearly 1,000 tanks, and over 1,000 planes washed over the flanks of the German operation like a catastrophic market crash. Uranus was perfectly timed. The frigid winds served as a natural coolant for the tanks, allowing them to drive harder and farther. Simultaneously, Soviet holdings launched a distractionary offensive in North Africa, splitting the already minimal attention of high command in Berlin. Over the course of 3 days, the Soviets completely reversed the fortunes of the battle, tearing into the weak, under-resourced junior partners, the 40,000 Romanian contractors protecting the German southern flank. The pincers of Project Crimson Tide drove relentlessly forward, achieving an almost total encirclement of the 4th and 6th Armies. Friedrich Paulus, branch manager of the 6th Army, received the horrifying report. His entire team, approximately 300,000 people, was trapped inside the Volga office park. The intranet connection was severed, and the exit routes were blocked by highly motivated Soviet retention teams. Paulus was presented with a fateful choice: attempt a desperate, high-risk, unapproved tactical breakout, or dig in and wait for the metaphorical cavalry. As the noose tightened, Tri-High Command in Berlin began to entertain the idea of airdropping critical supplies, a concept that would form the foundation for the 6th Branch's destruction. At a panicked video conference on the 23rd, Air Freight Manager Hans Jesenek, covering for the always absent Göring, guaranteed CEO Hitler the delivery of 500 tons of supplies per day to the trapped forces. This was a profoundly optimistic lie. Paulus had estimated he needed 700 tons to maintain basic function. The Luftwaffe's own internal estimate suggested they could manage 300 tons at best on a good day with clear weather. And without the Soviet anti-air team on duty, Hitler, buoyed by this wild confidence, approved the airlift and forbade any breakout attempt. Paulus was ordered to hold the line, regardless of cost. The Luftwaffe began dropping critical stockpiles of ammunition and fuel, but almost no food. As the encirclement dragged on, the 6th Branch began to starve. Bread rations were slashed in desperation, and the men resorted to high-calorie corporate emergency rations, sumptuous feasts of frozen horse fat. Wounded men awaiting medevac were placed in thin tents next to the temporary supply runways, where General Winter promptly marched in and froze them to their cots. Paulus sent increasingly frantic telexes to von Manstein, his operational commander, detailing the deteriorating situation and begging for freedom of action. The corporate euphemism for, "Please let me get my staff out of this death trap." Then, on January 30th, 1943, as the Soviets tightened their stranglehold and starvation claimed thousands daily, a special courier fought his way through the blizzard and the collapsing lines to deliver a package directly to Paulus in his command post, located in a department store basement. It was an ornate, heavy box, sealed with the Reich's most exclusive wax seal. Paulus, shivering and gaunt, ripped it open. Inside was a ceremonial baton and a formal notice from CEO Hitler himself. Promotion memorandum to Branch Manager Friedrich Paulus, 6th Army. From CEO Adolf Hitler. Effective immediately. New title: Generalfeldmarschall. Executive Vice President, Field Marshal grade. Paulus stared at the paper. His headquarters staff crowded around him, confusion turning to horror. "Field Marshal," whispered his chief of staff, his voice barely audible. "Sir, no German field marshal has ever surrendered or been captured alive." The realization hit Paulus with the force of 1,000 frozen panzer divisions. This was no honor. This was the ultimate, non-negotiable golden parachute. A mandatory, legally binding termination notice, packaged as a promotion. Hitler was ordering him to commit corporate seppuku. He had been unboxed, elevated to a rank that mandated his death. Paulus, the newly minted field marshal, the highest-ranking manager in the entire doomed office park, looked around at the grim faces of his starving staff. Outside, the sounds of Soviet tanks could be heard directly above the basement ceiling. He was trapped. He was starving. He had been promoted to die, and the Soviets were just moments away from walking into his makeshift headquarters. Next time, the Field Marshal's fatal refusal and the complete liquidation of the 6th Branch.